All right, so Dr. Baker is going to talk to you about bees and other pollinators, because it's more than just bees that pollinate flowers and other butterflies. Butterflies are those as well. And she's going to talk to you about those, and then also the importance of them, as well as creating a pollinator garden, because she's an expert at that. All throughout Wisconsin, she has created pollinator gardens. And something you can even do at home. So she's going to talk to you about that. While she's talking to you, boys and girls, about that, my class at least, I'm going to have sticky notes. If you come up with a question that she's not addressing and you want to know more about, please jot that on your sticky note. All right. Any questions from my class? No. All right. As we get started, I'll start passing out your sticky notes then. Hey, Thelma, I'll get you the rest of the
Hi.
Remember.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, pollinators and pollinator conservation, and specifically bees. Okay, I'm going to see if I can figure out my sharing screen here because, well, I need to share my screen to show you all the cool photos that I've got. Okay, are you guys seeing this? No? Yes?
No.
All right.
No, we're able to.
You can see me. All right, hold on. Usually it just pops. Okay, hold on. I think I got this. All right, can you see this now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Woohoo! All right, we're set. Okay, so we're talking pollinators today. And as your teacher already mentioned, pollinators can be much more than just bees, even though that's what we're familiar with. A lot of times we think pollinator, we think bees. So we're going to kind of expand on that a little bit here. So what is a pollinator? I guess is always one of the first really good questions to get at here is, what do they do? What is a pollinator? Well, it's an organism, it's an animal, it's an insect that helps pollination to occur, and pollination happens on plants. So that's where specifically they have one thing that needs to get pollinated, and those are the flowers, right? I'm sure you're all familiar with flowers, and there's lots of pictures here of insects on flowers, and all those insects are pollinating that flower. They're helping to make sure that the pollen gets moved to help that plant reproduce. And that way it can create the seeds and it can fruit and it can regrow, right? That's why we want pollination to happen, so the plants can reproduce. And the insects are a really key factor and part of that. And they can be bees, they can be butterflies, they can be moths. Yep, even moths. And a lot of times you think about those at nighttime. And they can be flies. They can even be things that are not insects. Sometimes birds can even help with that, and bats can help with it. But we're just going to focus on insects today because we can't cover everything. So there's one reason why bees are really the focus of pollination. It's because they are the best at it. Of all the creatures, bees rock the pollination world. And usually honeybees are the first bee that people think of, and that's probably what you think of. Honeybees are really common. They are something that maybe some of you know somebody that has a hive. Maybe some of you even have honeybee hives at home because we get a really important product out of them, honey, right? But they also, in order to make that honey, they need to have flowers. And then because of that, they're doing pollination as well. But honeybees are essentially a livestock. They're managed by humans. They were not from North America originally. They come from other parts of the world. So they have been introduced to North America. So what I like to focus on with bees is our native bees. So these are bees that have been here in the United States and North America for way before humans were ever here. And a lot of these bees are ones that you're not as familiar with. They are mostly solitary, means they like to hang out by themselves. They don't hang out in big groups. They're not in big colonies like what the honeybees are. And they're usually really gentle, and most of them cannot sting. Like they couldn't even puncture your skin. So some of you might be afraid of like honeybees, for example, because they could sting you. A lot of these native bees just can't do that. And what's really cool about the native bees is they are super diverse, and most people have no idea how diverse they can be. They're different colors and they're different sizes. So here's an example here of one of the tiniest bees that you can find. It is super tiny. And then one of the largest bees. So that tiny bee hardly even covers the eye of that big bee. And that tiny bee you can hardly see with your eye. To give you another example, this is a dime, and there's a little bee next to it. Like, look at the size of that tiny creature, but it's a bee, even though it's tiny. So they're not all the size of like a honeybee that we're used to. And there's just all different colors and structures, and some are most of them are a lot of yellow and yellows and blacks. Then we have bumblebees that are super fuzzy. And all these bees have a really important characteristic. They all have lots of hair. And that's really important because the hair on bees acts like Velcro to pollen. And that's how they collect that pollen that helps with pollination. Now, this is one of my favorite bees. Look at the color of this. It is amazing. It is brilliant green. And yes, you do have those in Indiana. They are found throughout most of North America. There's different species of them, but it's such a cool bee to see, and you usually don't know they exist until you start looking. So in the middle of summer, like June, July, August, that's when you can find these really cool, brilliant green bees. And it's called an agapostemon bee, which is, I don't know, I just like saying that word, agapostemon. So here's a quick question for all of you. I don't know if you know this or not, but does anybody want to take a guess, or maybe guess in your head how many bee species you have in Indiana? So put a number in your head, think about it. And then, we got a few guesses. Okay.
It's 7.
I think you got to think way higher, way higher.
106.
Okay, well, now we're talking. Yes, it's triple digits. So it's 400 species. 400. Isn't that crazy? Because most people have no idea. Like 400 different species. And all these species have different places where they live and different things that they like and different flowers that they prefer. It's almost, I can't even think about it, having 400. I live in Wisconsin, and here in Wisconsin, we have about the same. And I have only ever seen maybe a couple dozen, because they have such specific places where they like to live that we don't see most of them. And there's not a lot of information about most of these different bees. All right, so lots of different bee species, lots of different colors of bees and diversity of bees. Why are they important? Well, all pollinators, and particularly bees, have really important roles in their ecosystems. And we already talked about one that pollinators do, is that these insects help plants to reproduce, right? So they help the flowers to make seeds, to make fruits, and all those things are really important to other wildlife. Think about like all the other birds that are out there that you see on a daily basis. What do a lot of birds eat? A lot of birds, if you feed birds in the wintertime, you're feeding them seeds, right? Or sometimes fruit, and all that has to come from pollination. So fruits and seeds are really important for a lot of wildlife, birds in particular, but there's lots of mammals as well. You think about squirrels and things that live in the woods, they're all eating nuts and things. Those all need to be pollinated. Those are all from plants and trees that were pollinated. So pollinators are really important to wildlife because they provide food because of their pollination that they're doing. And that makes pollinators an ecological keystone. Now, this is a really big term. I don't know that you have talked about this at all, but ecological keystones just mean that these insects, these organisms are super important. They are key to their ecosystem. They are key to making things function the way things should function. And in the plant and insect world, most plants need an insect to help with pollination. So if you think about the other ways, like, could we have most plants if we didn't have pollinators? No. So you have to have the pollinators in order to have the plants. And it's a really, really intricate and really important relationship there. And so that's what makes pollinators a key group of organisms. But pollinators aren't just important to wildlife, they're also important to us. I always want to throw this in here that the value of pollinators is directly impactful on each of you because we all have to eat food on a daily basis. And so much of our food is reliant upon pollination and pollinators and bees and what they do also. So there are so many crops produced worldwide that we eat all the time that rely directly on insects. If any of you like apples or raspberries or kiwis or oranges, any of those fruits, strawberries, if you're going to go out this fall and pick pumpkins and squash, all of those need to have pollinators. They need to have the bees pollinating those plants. Otherwise, we don't have those fruits and those crops. And it is a huge business. It's a huge industry. Billions of dollars are spent growing these crops every year. So pollinators are key to making that all work. And in addition, so many of our really valuable and nutritious foods come from those plants that the insects are pollinating. Remember, if you're eating food, and we're all supposed to eat nutritious food, color is really important. You want greens and yellows and reds and oranges because that's all really nutrient-dense food, and that comes from the plants, which comes because of the insects doing their job. So pollinators are important for us, for wildlife, for plants, for the well-being of everything. We want to make sure that we are conserving them. And pollinator conservation means pollinator protection. Like, what can we do, or what do you need to do to make sure that pollinators are taken care of and they keep existing in our world, in our environments? So there's a lot of different groups and organizations that have said this is really important. And so we need to bring back the pollinators, we need to protect the pollinators. But in order to do pollinator conservation, we need to know what are the basic needs of pollinators. What are the basic things that they need to survive, to do all those important things that they do? And their basic needs are the same as us. And what do we need? And what do they need? They need food and they need shelter. Now, their food may look a little different than what we are typically eating, but they still need food, right? And that important source of food is flowers. And then for shelter, they need places to go to protect themselves. And that might be from the weather. It could be from, we're talking about hurricanes happening right now. So if you have big hurricanes or big storms coming, these insects need to have a protected place too. Some may go underground, some may find rock holes, or they go into trees or logs or things like that, but they need shelter. The other piece of shelter is from seasons. So we all live in a place where we have 4 seasons, and one of our seasons is really, really hard for any organism to survive, and they need to figure out what they're going to do about that. And it's coming up on us. It's winter, right? We know a lot of organisms and animals, birds, things that will actually travel to other places in wintertime to find shelter. Insects will do that too. There are some insects that will travel to South America or to Mexico to get out of here. And then other ones will just bury underground. Other ones will die, and then their young will start the next year. So there's lots of different ways to do that to get shelter. This was a cool picture that I had a student take. Actually, I think it was a 6th grader at one of the local schools. They saw this. This is a stem, and there's something sticking out of the stem. These are stems of wildflowers, and there is a tiny bee butt sticking out of that stem. And that stem is from a hollow mint plant. Now, that's a plant that's a wildflower. the stem got broken off or cut off. And then these bees use that as their shelter. Yeah, they go inside of it because it's hollow. It's a protected place. So shelter is important. And then flowers are important. So wintertime, we don't have any flowers here, right? No flowers in the Midwest. It just doesn't happen. But then spring comes and what shows up? Flowers show up. We get things with color coming back. So here's a couple of your violets, buttercups, lots of spring flowers showing up. And those are really important for pollinators because that's their food source. They come out of winter, the ones that are surviving here, and they need to eat that. Another big source that can be used by pollinators is one, I'm sure you know this flower. It shows up in our lawns. This is a picture I took on our farm. Do you know what flower that is? I'm sure you do. It's dandelions. And dandelions aren't originally native. They're not originally from North America, but they're here. They're all over the place. They're in our lawns, and a lot of bees love them. I have seen honeybees on them and bumblebees on them and lots of the green bees on them, lots of different bees. We'll use them because they show up early on in the season. And then here's another one. This is both shelter and flowers for food. This is a bumblebee that I found. It had taken shelter during a rainstorm underneath a leaf that was right next to the flower. So it was really convenient. It would go to the flower and eat, and then it would climb back underneath the leaf to get shelter. So both shelter and food were provided in this one place. So, you know, they are smart too. They can figure out what they need. So habitat's important. Creating habitat is what we need to do. And to create habitat, and this can happen at home, this can happen in parks, this can happen at schools, involves a little bit of thought. What things can we do to make sure this is the best place possible to support pollinators for pollinator conservation? And the key pieces are having flowers that are all season long. So we don't grow flowers in the wintertime here, but we can grow flowers in the springtime, in the summertime, and in the fall. So we want to have flowers all year long during our growing season. And then the other piece to that is to have flowers that are native. So these are the flowers that have been here in North America for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years. And especially like in Indiana, you know, you want the plants that are important and have been in your area, because the plants that are there in Indiana may be a little bit different than what we have here in Wisconsin. But native plants are important. So you want those specific plants. And this habitat can look beautiful. This is just one example of some native pollinator habitat that has been created here in the Midwest. Super important to have lots of blooms, and that's what we're seeing. Now, the reason habitat's also important is because there are some challenges that these pollinators are experiencing. Pollinator declines. So a decrease in the number of pollinators. This is something that is being seen worldwide. It's also being seen here in the United States. There are particular species that we know are really declining. And there's one in particular that I know that you all will recognize. This is a butterfly, so this one's not a bee, but this is such an iconic, such a well-known insect that it's one that always we have to make note of. It's the monarch butterfly, and I'm sure you've all seen the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly has experienced a 90% decline or decrease in their numbers in the past 20 years. So if we want to protect the monarch butterfly, we need to make sure it has the habitat that they need to reproduce and the flowers that are there like this butterfly to feed on. And an important plant with monarchs is milkweed, because that's the only plant that the caterpillars of this butterfly can eat. Now, if we go back to native bees, there are also declines in native bees that are happening. It's harder to document this. It's harder to see. Scientists have done research on this, but there's so many. Remember, there's like 400 in Indiana and in the Midwest. So it's really just hard to find those all. But there have been a couple species that have been well studied. And one of them is this species. It's a bumblebee. It's called the rusty-patched bumblebee. And it used to be found throughout the Midwest. It was found all throughout the Midwest and going further east up to the New England and found across just so much of our area of the country. And it has experienced huge declines in the last several decades to the point now that this bumblebee species is now on the endangered species list. It's the first bumblebee that has been listed. So it's an endangered species, just like we hear about like different birds and different mammals that are endangered. This bumblebee is endangered. And so what can we do to help protect this bumblebee? And it's a beautiful bee. Look at the fur and the fuzziness and the hair of this. So here is a map. This is a map of kind of our whole area of the Midwest. And the yellow and red areas are areas, spots where this bumblebee has been spotted in the last couple years. It used to be all across this area would have been red and yellow, but in the last decade or so now, we've been tracking it, and this is where we're finding it. In my area, which I live in southeastern Wisconsin, north of Milwaukee, I am in an area that is red. In fact, I have found the rusty patch bumblebee on our farm. But if you look where you are, and here's a map blown up of Indiana, you're kind of in a blank area. There is no recording. Nobody has found this endangered bumblebee. It doesn't mean it might not be there, but sometimes it's just there aren't enough people to look, or they don't know. And yeah, because I know that it's found in Ohio. It's found in, down by Indianapolis. There's a lot of people in Indianapolis, so that tends to help too with finding things. So it's just kind of an open area where you're at. So one of the key things with the rusty patch is like, how can we help it? How can we help this species and other pollinator species to be able to, survive and thrive and keep reproducing? Well, we want to create habitat. We want to bring flowers in. That's the important part of that, is they need to have flowers. It's a key piece. It's one of the things that we think is the biggest reason that there's been such a decline, is the lack of habitat, missing habitat. So creating flowering habitat, and then know what flowers the bees need. So remember, native flowers to Indiana. That's what you need. So as I wrap up here, I just want to show you one of the projects that I have worked on. This is at my kids' school, where they created pollinator habitat. And I've done this at a lot of different schools. Some of them we've done plant seeding, and some of them we have done transplants of wildflowers. So this is at my kids' school. This is in the backyard. We took the sod out. So we took the grass out. We cut it out with this really cool piece of equipment called a sod cutter. It was really fun. We had to remove all the sod, and then we laid down a bunch of mulch. So just like wood chips, or not wood chips, like shredded wood. And then we planted into it. And there are the plantings of all these native wildflowers. And this was done last year. And unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of this one recently, but it is, oh my gosh, these flowers are like 5-6 feet tall. There have been so many butterflies and bees coming to this all summer long. The kids love looking at it and seeing it. And it has just been beautiful. So this is a smaller version of that. This is at my house, pollinator habitat, and just how cool it can be to have it. And it doesn't need to be big. None of these areas are very large. They are maybe like 10 feet by 20 feet. So not too big, but you can still get a lot out of it and see a lot without too much work. And in fact, just yesterday, I did a field day here in Wisconsin, and we were demonstrating how to establish pollinator habitat. And this is the crew and all the people that were out there. And there's the sod cutter right down the front corner, showing and what it looks like when we remove the sod. And this is at a park where they already have lots of pollinator habitat, but they wanted to show how can you do it in a little bit different way. And then afterwards, in this area with lots of habitat, we did some seed collecting. So we had everybody go out and collect some of the seeds, and then they used those seeds to actually help replant new pollinator habitat, which was really cool and a really fun activity. So last thing, this is just in front of my house right now. I just realized we're coming to the end of our growing season, so there aren't as many flowers out anymore, but this is one that is in full bloom right now. It's called New England Aster. It's beautiful. It's a native. I don't know if yours is maybe done down there in Indiana or maybe it's still going, but it's the only flower that we have here right now that the pollinators can visit. And I've seen monarchs on it. I've seen bees on it on a sunny day. And yeah, soon the season will be done. And then I'll have to wait for next spring for the flowers to come back. So that's what I have. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them.
All right, we have a question in Miss Craven's class. I'll make sure
Okay.
you- okay.
What's the biggest species of bee that we have today?
Ooh, that's a great question. So the biggest species of bee that we have, and I'd say probably four in our area, would be some of the big queen bumblebees. And actually, this is a really good time of the year. So because bumblebees are one of those pollinators that they have colonies during the summertime, and then in the fall, like right now, all the bees die except for one, and it's the queen bee, and she is big and she is fuzzy. And there are some like the yellow bumblebee, they can be like 2 inches long. They're huge, yellow and black, the yellow and black. So those are probably the ones that are the largest ones that we have.
Mr. Ragan, do you have any questions from your class?
Sorry, our kids were being really quiet and I didn't realize we were muted. What was your question, Drake?
What about bushes?
What about bushes, he says.
Ooh, that's a great question. Do bushes have value too? Or like flowers and pollinator habitat? Yes, absolutely. So we usually call bushes shrubs. I'm not sure why they call them trees or shrubs, right? Trees are the super tall ones, and then shrubs are the shorter one. They're also bushes. And there are lots of really good bushes and shrubs that can be pollinator habitat also. And that's actually a really good question because some of the earliest flowers that come in the spring don't come from wildflowers, they come from bushes and shrubs. So having those things like dogwoods, there's some really cool ones, willows too. They are some of the first flowers that you'll find in the springtime that the bees can visit.
What pollinator is your favorite?
Oh, my favorite pollinator. I have a lot of them. That's a hard question. I would probably pick that green bee. They're so pretty when you find them, and they just look really cool. And for me, I didn't know they existed until maybe like 10 years ago when I started really studying bees. And it just, to find out that there are different colors of bees that are not just like black and yellow was really neat. And not just color, but like really colorful. Yeah. So that they call them the halicted sweat bees, halicted bees, those green bees.
I had a student, you mentioned that through the winter, about the colony, the queen bee being the only one to survive. Are there any species of bees that the entire hive continues on into the next year? That was the question she had.
Yes. So honeybees have their whole colony that survive. They don't die off at all. The only ones in the honeybee colony that do die in the fall are the males. They are not valued, so they are not allowed in the hive. They think the females kick them out. So all the females in a honeybee hive in the wintertime survive. So you can have thousands and thousands and thousands of bees in a honeybee hive. But in the bumblebee colonies, it's only the one queen bee that will survive, and everybody else dies.
I got a student who asked, how do vegetables, what was the question again?
Like, how do vegetables grow if there's no pollination in the winter?
Were you able to hear that?
Can you
How do
repeat
ve-
that?
How do vegetables grow if there's no pollination in the winter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the time, what we are eating with vegetables isn't like the fruit. So it's not like the apple. So we might be like carrots, we're eating the roots, right? Potatoes, it's the same thing. But in order for those plants to reproduce, like carrots, somebody actually has to let that carrot plant go to seed, and then they collect the seed, which is still required pollination. But the part of the plant that we are eating is not the part that is the seed. I don't know if any of you have ever grown like carrots, for example, but have teeny, teeny, tiny seeds. And when you plant them, yeah, they'll grow, but that's not the part that we eat.
Aren't there bluebees? I think they live in the state of Maine.
Yes, there are blue bees. And a lot of times they aren't like bright blue, for example. A lot of times it's the light catching it and then they'll look kind of bluish or bluish purplish. But yes, there are definitely blue bees. And you probably have some in Indiana as well. They are all over the place. They're not just in Maine. These are great questions.
I have a student that asked the question, what does the blue bee look like?
Ooh. So the blue bees typically just look like an all black bee. They don't usually have yellow on them. I don't have a picture right now to show you, but they're kind of like yeah, they don't have a lot of other color. There's no lighter colors in it. It's just dark. And then if you get it in the sunlight, then they'll usually show up like a bluish black color. They're not as brilliant colored as those green bees are.
All right, well, we are just about out of time here, but we want to thank Dr. Heidel-Baker for her time this morning. Can you guys give her a big hand, please?
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.